following the session. So welcome to Defining Stress and Stressors, Learning How to Support Children's Resilience Fireside Chat, presented by Dr. Robin Alter and Anne Murray. Welcome. Our head office is located on the sacred land that has been the site of human activity for over 15,000 years. This land is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, and the Wendat, and is now home to many diverse people. We acknowledge that the City of Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. We acknowledge these nations and any other recorded or unrecorded First Peoples who cared for the land as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land named Takaranto, where the trees meet the water or the gathering place. As settlers, we enter into an agreement to share this land equitably, and as settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our community. We are grateful for the opportunity to work with communities and on this territory. So I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Robin Alter. Dr. Alter is a registered clinical psychologist in the practice for over 40 years. In her consulting capacity, she also consults in the Indigenous community regarding fetal alcohol syndrome and conducts FASD assessments. Her current practice includes both the assessment and treatment of children, adolescents, and adults. While running her own practice, Dr. Alter has also taught courses in psychology part-time at York University. She's an author of several books and has been working with Strong Minds, Strong Kids Psychology Canada for over 10 years in a variety of capacities. Thanks, Dr. Alter, for being here today. And we also have Anne Murray. Anne has a master's in education and has worked for many years as a registered nurse in Ontario. She has a broad interest in families, focusing on creating resilient schools and communities. She works with families, educators, and youth, coaching and facilitating ways to recognize, reduce, and develop strategies for managing stressors in their lives. Since 1999, Anne has been instrumental in the development of Kids Have Stress Too program, initiated by Strong Minds, Strong Kids Psychology Canada. Anne is the lead trainer with SMSKPC, providing training, program development, and building partnerships with a focus to reduce stress in our children and youth. And I am Pamela Sirianis. I'm the Senior Coordinator of Programs and Community Partnerships at Strong Minds, Strong Kids. So as you may know, our Kids Have Stress Too and Stress Less programs are evidence-informed programs that are youth-centered and inquiry-based and teach tangible stress management strategies and skills and build emotional resilience in children and youth, both in and out of the classroom. And today we'll be touching on some of the ways we've reinvigorated these programs this year. So before we get into that, I do want to get to know all of you in the audience and learn more about you. So I'm just going to share a poll. What capacity are you joining us in today? So are you a professional that works with children? Are you a parent, or are you both? So as we can see, there are a lot of professionals that work with children, a lot of parents, and many people that are both parents and professionals that work with children. So that's great to know. Thank you all for sharing that information for us. I also want to know where you're joining us from, so we can get a sense of where in Canada our community is coming in from. Sometimes we have people from outside of Canada as well, so we do have that option. But love to see where everybody's joining us from. So I see that we do have some folks joining us from the Atlantic region. Predominantly, we're in central Canada. We've got some folks joining us from the prairies and some from the West Coast. Thanks again. And the last question we have for you, what is the age of the children you support? Thanks, everyone. So I see we've got some folks who support children age 0 to 3, while the majority of us support children 4 to 12, and some of us also support teens 13 to 18. So thanks again for sharing that information. That's really helpful for us as we guide the conversation today. And then before we get into it, just some housekeeping. So there will be time for Q&A at the end. Please put those questions in the Q&A function, separate from any chat that happens today. Thanks so much. So Anne and Robin, we've invigorated our programs and resources this year, and you've both been very instrumental in sharing your expertise to ensure that we maintain their integrity, keep that same great evidence-based approach in content while also making improvements to the resources. So among those improvements, we've incorporated more inclusive language, updated links to external resources, and enhanced our explanations of stress and stressors. So our first question is for Anne. Can you please explain what stress is, what stress versus stressors, what stressors versus the stress response is, and what the difference between the two is?
Sure. Thanks, Pamela. So this has been an ongoing conversation that we've had throughout the years, because stress is the word that keeps coming up over and over. And we've chosen in our relook at all of our guides to make the definition that stress equals stressors plus stress response. So let me break down those words. So what is a stressor? A stressor is something that's outside of ourselves, something that makes us feel worried, bothered, vulnerable, I can't cope. And it's very unique to each of us as individuals. It could be for our young people, our teenagers, us as adults. But the importance is to recognize that those stressors happen to us, and they're very much based on years ago with the caveman. They had stressors that were life-threatening with, do I race after that animal and kill it, or will it chase after me and kill me? Our stressors that we have today are very different. Some may be in that life-threatening moment, but most of our stressors are related to relationships, are related to technology, time, and no question, we've had stressors over these past few years with our pandemic. But all of these impact us depending upon how we as individuals respond to them and create the stress response. That's where we've heard the term fight or flight, and that tied into the caveman. Do I fight the animal? Do I flight from it? And we also know there's the freeze, the deer in the headlight not know how to respond. But the stress response is a very individualized physiological response that our body takes on. And that can be related to behaviors that we might have, how the body might respond with a fast heart rate, with tension, feelings we might have of frustration, sadness, anger, or how our mind might go to being racing and can't focus and unable to concentrate. So that really is that definition that stress is the stressor plus the stress response creates that stress situation, and how keeping in mind it's very unique to each of us as individuals. What might affect Robin may be different than Pamela, different than me, and certainly all of you within the situations you're in.
Thanks, Anne. That's great. And then what are some key strategies adults can use to support children and youth?
So as adults, we're very much there. We're there as role models for our little ones, for our middle years ones, for our teenagers, and how we respond is picked up by others. So if we as adults can try to be aware of what brings calm into our life, that may be getting some exercise, having a good night's sleep, that may be participating in nature, that might be doing deep breathing, but finding the calm that we can be that role model. And as that, looking at strategies that we can use with our young people, listening to it from the child or teenager's perspective, what they describe as what it is that is their stressor that worries them, bothers them, upsets them, is their reality. And that reality is real to them. We may think, oh, don't be worried about that you weren't invited to that birthday party. But for them, it's very real. So hearing it from the child's perspective is really core to how we as adults can support our young people. We can also look at some anticipation. What might be their stressors, knowing it in advance, asking them what worries or bothers them. And that anticipation, maybe we can shift things so that that stressor won't be as strong, or maybe we can shift things so that we can anticipate that stressor. Maybe transition moments, and we know those are stressful for all of us. Maybe we can look at, okay, give a 5-minute warning, or say that when this is done, then we're going to do that. And those could be a way that we can support our young people to be able to deal with that situation of what their stressors might be.
Awesome, thank you. Robin, though many children and youth have returned to in-person last year, even more have done so this year. As we settle into this new school year with all the mandates that have been released, what are some ways that educators and parents can help children with reintegrating into the classroom and facing the stressors that may be associated with this?
Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it? You know, I mean, I think everybody's experiencing stress with the return to the classroom. On the one hand, we think, isn't it great to get back to some normalcy? However, there are a lot of stressors happening on the faculty, on the educators at school who are in Ontario or without a contract for the childcare workers. But from the kids' perspective, I think, you know, kids often have trouble with change. You know, everybody kind of got used to, there was a new normal with respect to the pandemic. And for many kids, that normal, there were lots of advantages for lots of kids because, you know, for kids, the most important people in their lives are their parents and their families. And, you know, in some ways they got to be in a cocoon, you know, they got to be with their families and their parents a lot more than in what we call normal times. So all of a sudden they have to give that up and go back to school. And, you know, school itself has a lot of stressors. You know, in mental health and children's mental health, we would always see a reduction in the number of parents seeking help in the summer when there's no school. All of a sudden, kids have fewer problems. And, you know, there are academic stressors. You know, am I doing as well as my peers? Will my parents be upset with me because I, you know, didn't do well on that test? There are social pressures, which I think are even greater for most kids. Am I fitting in? How do I fit in? Why doesn't anybody want to be my friend? How do I have more friends? Why are people being mean to me? You know, all those kinds of things are what kids face every day at school. So, you know, I think we have to recognize that those stressors are affecting them. Kids may express their stress. I think Anne did a great job of explaining how stress affects people, why they get triggered by these things. And she also said that everybody has their own individual way of showing it. And kids, you know, if you're a parent, your child may express their stress very differently from you. Even though you're the role model, they may have a different style. You know, you may, you know, when you get stressed, get kind of quiet and introverted and more of the freeze response that Anne mentioned, but your kid may be more of a fighter and act out. And, you know, as a parent, if you can recognize those behaviors, if they are unusual, as signs of stress, and then try to identify what the stressors are and do a little problem solving, you know, like, what can I do about this? You know, how can I make this situation a little bit better? Like Anne said, giving kids an opportunity just to, if you can find out what it is that they are worried about, or, you know, what's number one on their radar screen, then you can kind of zero in and try to solve the problem. You know, she mentioned, you know, trying to get ahead of it, trying to know what kinds of things generally stress them. And then if you can anticipate them and put some things into place that can prevent it, that would be great. Most of us aren't that smart. That's pretty hard thing to do. But, you know, sometimes we can, and we certainly try. But our programs are all about how to relieve the stress and get back to some state of neutrality, where we, you know, have that sense of calm, and we're back to what's normal for us, there's so many things that you can do once you've identified it. The main trick is to say, okay, something's going on here. Some kind of stressor is happening. My child's reacting to it. That's probably the most important step. I mean, then once you've done that, then you can move into, what are the things we can try to reduce the level of stress that this person is feeling and get back to a neutral, calm state.
Awesome. Thanks, Robin. And then what are some signs, Anne, that caring adults can look for to determine which children and youth may need more stress management support than others? So I know Robin mentioned looking for things out of the normal. Do you want to expand on that? Or is there something else you can
Sure. Robin's done a great job. And really what it comes down to, a couple key points that Robin has identified. We want to try to bring ourselves back to that neutrality, that calm, that feeling of relaxation. That's really core to our stress management. And the other point that she clearly identified that links to the response I gave earlier too, is to look for if there's a change in your child or teenager's behavior. If they tend to be very talkative and now you're noticing they're withdrawing, that may indicate that there's something going on. We as adults need to be what I call the detective. We need to try to figure it out, because for the very young child, they don't have the same verbalization as what your teenagers may have. And, mother of 3 boys that went through teenage years, there's a lot of grunting, leave me alone, go in the room. Like, you don't necessarily get the responses. So being aware of what it is that has changed. And it can be in a variety of areas. I mentioned about, talking and withdrawing. It could be with our younger child that we see a regression, that there's more toileting accidents. It may be more aggressive behavior that we may see in other age children. So being aware of that is the first step. Coming from a nursing background, I do share that if you've seen these behaviors that go on for a couple of weeks, that there's a significant change and you're not sure, it can be helpful to go and have it medically looked at, because maybe there is something physiologically going on. Maybe there is blood work that's needed. Maybe there's something else. But in the place of that, maybe it is a stressor. So being aware of it and trying to have those conversations. We have a number of great resources on our website, and I know you're going to receive information in the follow-up email to be able to link to them. But I just want to highlight some because, for example, they're called Toolbox Activities. So they're strategies that we can use. And so one of the ways that we can be supportive of our young ones when we see that there's this change is that we are more aware of it. It's a toolbox activity called Stop, Look, and Listen. And it's exactly what it says. And it's very simplistic. Like, I like to think that our stuff that we have, it's very research-based, but it's very practical. So stop what you're doing, get down to the child's level or be at their level if they're taller than you, look at them and listen. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth to button up and hear it from their perspective. Because sometimes what it can do just in talking about it can bring them down from that heightened, escalated stress response. And what it can do is we know that the back of the brain where the amygdala is, that's where the emotion is, and that charges us up. And that has to have a moment. We talk about 9 seconds that has been in the research to settle us down before our prefrontal cortex can think and strategize what to do. So we need to be mindful that we may have to say, you're really frustrated, but we also want to be there to listen as they talk about it, because in that talking, it engages the prefrontal cortex, and that in itself can bring them down. So being able to have that stop, look, and listen as one of the strategies, and you'll hear about more strategies as we continue on, but that is very effective and can be used for all ages, even with our loved ones in our partnership lives or in our friendship lives, to be able to listen. It enhances the relationship, and that's what's going to help when our children are really stressed.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Anne, but I think the stop, look, and listen is an activity that we're directing parents and caregivers to do, even when the kids are not upset.
Yes. Yep.
Right? Just in just every day, just take a moment to stop, do it like a checkup, like, how is my kid today? What's going on? Just stop, look, take a good look at their do they look calm and relaxed? You know, what's their face showing? You know, what's their energy level? You know, it's like you know, just checking in with them, you know, on a holistic way, and not just when they're upset, but you know,
Absolutely.
on a regular basis, right?
And that raises another. Robin and I can go back and forth for lots of more than an hour, but it raises another point, and that is, you know, our kids and teenagers don't kind of write it in our agenda when they want to talk about things, and so we may need to say, put that phone away, put that activity I was doing, and just focus at that moment, because doing it even for 30 seconds to say, I see you're really upset and you're having that time to listen, but let's talk about it after dinner, or let's talk about it when we come in from recess. It just gives that place of relationship that a child and a teenager, these are effective, even though we've got them with our younger years programs, they're effective for all ages. And it can feel that place, somebody cares about me. I'm being listened to. And that understanding, it may not be able to happen in that very moment, but just it can break that escalation of where that stressor is, and for that child and youth that's in a heightened place.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. That's great. So we've kind of talked about, you know, what stressors are, the stress responses to look for. So Robin, now that we have that better understanding of the definitions of stressors and stress responses, and some key strategies to address them at the start of the school year, can you share with the audience why it's important for us to make our programs both universal prevention stress management programs, but supportive for all people with different experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've come to understand is that although we all have the same physiology as human beings, you know, our brains and bodies are basically organized in the same way, but we all learn from the beginning of our infancy, you know, different ways of being, you know, different strategies. You know, some people are more emotive and, you know, express their emotions freely. Other cultures are more internal and keep things more inside, you know. So and none of these things are right and wrong. It's not that one is better than the other, but you know, we have worked hard to make our programs accessible and meaningful to people and children and youth of all different cultural learnings, you know, and you know, we want people everywhere, children and youth everywhere, to be able to use them to the max. So we've been working hard in that.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Robin. And do you have anything to add to that?
No, I just think, you know, that whole place of what we can be and how we can support our young kids is a really big one that I think we want to continue to look at. And, you know, I'm just thinking, and this might go into the next question, but how have we enhanced our programs over the years? Because we've really tried to move with all the new changes in society. We are more mindful of what systemic racism can be and how these are much bigger community effects on our young people. The gender identity has become an area that we're much more mindful of. So we've modified our guides to be reflective of these aspects of our young people's lives. But we also are very aware that there is that one-to-one individual time of how we might be able to be effective. And so maybe if I can just share to come back to some more of the resources. I mean, one of the areas, and we've touched on it, you know, it's been a new beginning, and that normalcy that used to be, you know, 3 years ago, that's no longer a normalcy of kids in school because of the impact of the past couple of years. What can we do on an individual basis to look at each individual child with what and where they're coming from? So some of you are professionals working maybe in the school setting or in childcare settings or community settings, being aware of what is the background, what is the story that this young person is bringing into the setting that they're in, and hearing that story, and being aware that by having those conversations, there may be some things that we do that may be more stressful in that environment. I mean, sometimes bright lights or loud noises may be reflective of another country that a young person has come from, that a big bang has more meaning. And so being aware and hearing those stories. And one of the toolbox activities we have is looking at how we can decrease that environment that our children are in, whether it be in the home, whether it be in the school group setting. And I would encourage you to go and look at that, because it brings up various areas of bringing humor into the environment, of being more organized in the classroom or in the home setting. And so this really can support our young people to move them to a place where they can take some individual responsibilities, but also that we can enhance what it is that we have with them and what their background, because we are much more mindful, having gone through COVID, the adversities that some individuals and families have been affected by. And I think that's an area that we've really tried to do with our look into the future of how we continue to bring this into the current reality.
So if I could just add to that, Anne, thank you for bringing up systemic racism and things like, trauma and intergenerational trauma, things like that. I think we've become very clear that our programs are not going to eradicate those things, but we try to deal with helping children in the moment, whatever is triggering or causing the problem that's occurring right now, perhaps make that moment a little better and help the child get back to some level of neutrality and relaxation. And there are other places to go to help with, the systemic racism. And there's a lot of work being done now. I think it's quite, I'm feeling quite optimistic about the future, because so many people are working on that. And there does seem to be a tipping point in terms of people becoming more aware of how those things affect people on a daily basis and wanting to do something about that perhaps the future will be brighter and we can eradicate some of the traumas from the past. But our programs are not designed to do that particularly.
We're very much into primary prevention before the problems have been identified. But I think one of the pieces that continues to come out that we've touched on is that place of relationship. And so for all of you who probably lead very stressful lives yourself, with what you are as a parent or what you are with your work situation outside of the home, and never underestimate what one moment of you can be as you connect with a child. And I do have to share, I've just, in our book club, we did an invisible thread, and it's about an individual who was crossing the street and an 11-year-old was asking for money, and she continued to walk, and then she turned back and she gave some money, and what it led to in terms of that relationship. And like, was just one moment that was a 30-second pause that shifted the life for both of those individuals. And I think, we need to be mindful of that smile we give to a child, that moment of listening, and what that can be.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Yeah, I think that's very important, that relationship, and knowing that you just being there as a caring adult helps a ton for these kids that we're trying to support. So both of you, Anne and Robin, before we move on to the audience questions, is there anything else you want to address about our program enhancements that you would like to share with the audience?
Well, I just want to add, Anne and I do this a lot, we play off of each other, but you mentioned relationship and listening and caring. The other part of relationship that I always like to emphasize is just time enjoying your child, just laughing with them, enjoying their art, having a game with them, playing, going for a walk, going for a bike ride. And showing it, like Anne, you mentioned the smile, showing it on your face, that you enjoy them. You have to remember, regardless of what's going on, parents are still the most important people in their child's life. And when a parent clearly enjoys a child and says things like, boy, that was fun, I really had a good time with you, you're so much fun, that's the best way to improve their self-esteem and contribute to their resilience, because they think, well, this person who I think is the most important and the best person in the world likes me and enjoys me. And that alone actually has, in my practice, that intervention alone has changed the lives of so many children and parents. So I think we forget about it. I think a lot of parents these days think of parenting as a job, which it is. It's the hardest job. It's one of the most important jobs. But as part of that, it's also enjoyable. And hopefully you're enjoying being a parent, because, as a psychologist, I ask kids when I do assessments, do you think you're gonna, even I ask kids as young as 3 this, do you think someday you'll be a parent? You'll get married someday, have a family? I ask in that kind of cavalier way, little joking way. But very young children are telling me too often, I think, no way, I'm not going to do that. It's too hard. So if you want to be grandparents someday, which I am and enjoying very much, and so is Anne, then you've got to let your kids know that parenting is also fun. And it's not just all hard work, which it is. I'm not taking away that. But there are those fun times. And the more fun times there are, and the more you can show it on your face, it will reap lots of benefits for all of you.
We've heard children of different ages say to us that I feel like my parents are on the phone more than they're with me. And I think it's something we have to be very mindful for some of us who are older, that phones were not part of our child raising days. The phones have become so much of an appendage to us, but the need to turn them off, to close them down, and to have that, back to that stop, look, and listen, and have that moment with your child and laugh and play. And we have a dear little 1-year-old grandson. And I've often said, when I leave, it's not about the minutes, it's about the moments that I have with them. And it is about the moments. It doesn't matter whether it's half an hour, or longer, but it's that moment of just having some fun time.
I just saw a little video the other day of it wasn't even it was an infant, a baby that was still crawling, and there were a whole bunch of toys in a circle, and the infant could crawl towards any of the toys, and guess which toy it crawled to? It wasn't a toy, it was a phone.
Oh. Whoops. So funny.
So they are watching us. They are watching us all the time. Okay, so are there questions from the audience?
Yeah, so we have some questions that came in before the session. So for those of you in the audience now, still feel free to put your questions in the Q&A, but we can start addressing those questions that came in advance. So our first question for Anne and Robin is, how can we help kids come down from their peak in a crisis cycle? So I know we talked about some ways to support, but what are some ways when they're really, in a tantrum or really worked up and upset? How can we support them to come back down to that neutral?
Well, it's always tough. I mean, like once kids get into that, it almost has to run its course. Sometimes I think you can distract them, depending on their age, but focus them on something else, something that might be interesting, or but don't, try. The most important thing is for you not to react, for you not to get mad and add more fuel to the fire. Try to stay calm and take a moment or two to take a deep breath, look the other way, get yourself together, realize, okay, this is a situation I have to deal with, and try not to be punitive or reactive, because then you're just adding, more problems. If they're a little bit older, you can try to, like Anne was saying, just validate their feelings and let them know that you get it, that this is upsetting, and that, not try to take them away from it too quickly, let them know that you hear them. What happens is the amygdala for older children. Young children don't really have rational thinking. It hasn't been developed yet. So you can't reason with them too much. But older children, the rational part of their brain gets hijacked by the amygdala and it's not functioning. So, you have to calm the amygdala down before you can start reasoning with them. And I don't know, do you have anything to add to that, Anne?
Well, I also valid what you've said, Robin. I think takeaway, it has to play its course. As much as we may be in the checkout counter and we have a child that's screaming and ranting and wants that chocolate bar and we're embarrassed by it, it's what can you do in the moment? And one thing certainly is keeping our children safe in that moment, because sometimes things can rave up very quickly and heightened. And that it is very much a physiological with the amygdala. And so calming them and trying as much as we want to doesn't necessarily work, but looking at how you're responding, as was said, trying to be calm. But it also might be how we do that role modeling. Like maybe it is, you start taking deep breaths and maybe your little one or your big one will respond with doing the same. But, so once we work through it, then it's doing something that maybe it's getting some exercise. We know that exercise can help to reduce the adrenaline and cortisol that are elevated in those moments. So maybe there are ways at that time to, go out for walking or running as that tantrum is happening. Maybe it is that the child just has to keep banging the floor and screaming out because that's going to move them through that stage. So after it calms, and that may not be the time to have the conversation. It may be later in the day. It might be the next day. You'll know best knowing your young people in the settings that you're in. But maybe there are ways to talk about, like, okay, I saw that you were really frustrated and got annoyed and that happens. And what might help that situation another time, depending upon the age and language of the person. Maybe it is looking at what are some strategies that can be done, like deep breathing, like stretching, like counting backwards from 10, 9, 8, that can get that prefrontal working. Maybe it is looking at what was it that triggered it and how can I maybe take some ownership as an individual to reduce that, so that there always can be learning from these situations. It doesn't make that tantrum, that time of such anger, wrong. It's what learning can come from it. And I think that that's an important part, because challenges are part of all of our lives, whatever age. It's how do we work through it? And another great resource that we have that's only in the calm moment, it's not when we're revved up, is our problem solving toolbox activity. And that can be in dialogue with the individual, whatever age. What is the problem? And helping them identify how big a problem is it? Is it small? Is it big? Or is it on a hand? Is it, a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5 in terms of getting bigger? But it's that chance to do a couple of things. A person's able to verbalize it. They're able to see that relational piece with the adult, that somebody cares and wants to listen to me. It's then a place of brainstorming. What can you do about it? And so that gives a person a chance to feel like maybe I've got some choice. And we know when we have choice in our life, it helps to reduce our stress. And then it's choosing something and they're in control of what they choose. And then going back to how did it work? But that can be a strategy after the fact. You can't do any of that when the tantrum is happening.
Wonderful, thank you. I think another question that came in that flows really nicely following that one is, when we as adults trying to support children are experiencing our own stress, what can we do to make sure that that doesn't negatively impact the kids that we're trying to support? How do we, stop ourselves before we continue to stress out those kids?
Well, we have to take care of ourselves first. I think you used this analogy, Anne, as well. When we used to fly, we flew more frequently in the past than we are now. But they tell you to, if the oxygen masks are released and you're traveling with small children, put them on your face first, because if you're not breathing, you can't help anybody. So the first thing to do is to calm yourself. In my own personal life, when my stepdaughter was young and she would do something that would trigger me, I remember I used to turn around. So if I stopped looking at her, because I was getting triggered and getting very angry, but if I stopped looking at her and just talked to myself for a few seconds, then I could bring myself back to, calm, and then I could deal with the situation. And that alone is has an interesting effect on children, because it's saying, oh, this person, in front of me is taking a moment to compose themselves, to get themselves together. They're not just reacting. And so it was a very, very helpful strategy. So, we do, I think it's very helpful the more you understand about the brain. And that's one of the things we're learning about, that when a child is out of control, their rational part of their brain is not working right then. They're getting triggered. The amygdala is taken over their brain. And, just understanding that helps you deal with them better, so that you're not trying to have a rational discussion. You're not expecting them to be logical and reasonable. You have an emotional person in front of you who is trying to deal with their emotions. And, you can be reassuring with them. It's okay. You're okay. You're going to be okay. I know this is awful. You're seeing this as awful right now, but it's going to be okay. Honestly, it's going to be fine. And reassuring messages, can get through. It looks bad right now, but children, what the amygdala does is it jumps to conclusions. It says things like, well, you had a terrible time at that birthday party last time. It's going to be horrible this time. I don't want to go, or the teacher looked at me crooked yesterday, and, or I got a bad grade yesterday. I don't want to go to school, like it assumes on the basis of very little information that everything is going to be horrible. But at that moment, you are the rational part of your child's brain. So you have to help them calm down a bit so that they can hear you and get into some rational discussion. And, once, like Anne said, once those things are triggered, once the cortisol, which is the major hormone that gets released, once it's released, it's released. It takes a while for it to dissipate and get reabsorbed into the system. So don't expect immediate solutions, that everything is going to resolve. Even if you're using all the strategies, it's not going to happen instantaneously. Our systems are not designed that way, so, buckle up, sit down, like whatever you had planned at that moment is not going to happen, because something else has taken off, and it's going to take a while for it to, to land. And you're in for the ride.
Good descriptions, and back to the plane and get that oxygen. But so many factors of how we as adults might deal with the situation. And the one thing that I learned through parenting can be forgiving. We may have blown it, and maybe the next day we have to say, I really blew it, but I learned from it. And that place of recognizing, maybe we as adults, sometimes we have to lower our expectations, because expectations can make it very stressful for us. And so what can you do? That there may be times that your children and teenagers in your areas of responsibility are having these tantrums and are really having a difficult time. And as Robin turns around, that worked for her. Maybe for you, it's walking out of the room. Maybe if that's safe for the children that are left behind, maybe it's not possible. Maybe it's looking out the window. Nature, we know, has a positive effect on reducing our stress levels. And just by looking out at nature, certainly walking in it does even more, but the effects of just looking at the changing colors, especially at this time of year. But that self-care is vital. And, maybe it is that you have a long to-do list, and maybe you only can do what's on the A part of it, the essentials, and let the others go. What can you do to pamper yourself at times? How can you make it so maybe there aren't the rushed moments, that you can give yourself some time? Because you know, children and teenagers come into our life and they don't choose when you're busy and when you're not busy. It just kind of happens. But recognize and pat yourself on the back for all that you're doing that is right. And maybe it is making a list and just jotting it down. What I did right today, what was the positive? And that can reaffirm who you are. And research shows the more that we can have optimism and gratitude in our life, it produces the endorphins, which are those feel-good hormones, and it physiologically makes a difference in our body. So start, you know, your journal of what's going right.
Yeah, so I noticed there was an interesting question that came in. Did you pick that up, Pamela?
Sorry, there were a couple, so do you mind
okay. There was one about teenagers languishing.
Yeah, so actually I was going to bring that one up now, because Anne again so beautifully spoke to like the positive and looking at the positive. So for both of you, just to paraphrase it, that children or teens specifically seem to have lost interest in a lot of things, and that lack of motivation and that shutting down as a response of all the stressors that they're experiencing. So how do we support these apathetic teens and get them more excited and those positive ways of coping and managing stress?
So much of this place of, I mean, it's certainly seeing if there is something clinically going on. I truly think, you know, going to a psychologist, going to medical, but that place that people are languishing and what it can be, but trying to engage in those conversations of, and observations that you might have. Where are the passions? Where are the gifts? Where are the strengths of this young person? And what does give them that excitement in their life? Perhaps it's a little moment. Maybe it's a certain food. Maybe it's that they've been able to do a certain activity, but trying to build on those areas that are the strengths that they have, and how to encourage of what's going right in their life, because the teens have been affected very significantly through these years with the lack of social time and keeping distance. And they're the years that are supposed to be pushing the adults away in their life as they're figuring out what is it that I want to do and what's important to me. So they have been impacted, but how can we possibly have it that they can be engaged in what it is that they love to do and building on that. And it may not be what we want them to do. And, you know, I often use the expression, who owns the problem? Is it me as the adult that I am struggling with what they want to do, or is it that they own the problem? And certainly we want to keep them safe. We want it to be morally okay. But if we can have them be engaged in also having some choices and some decision making.
I don't know. I haven't spent too much time thinking about this, but I think it's a really interesting question. And what comes to my mind is that, you know, developmentally, as children become teenagers, they become more aware of their reflective thinking. They, you know, like young children act and play and do, you know, they kind of think through their actions. We learned that from Piaget. But teenagers and the rest of us, we start internalizing, we start thinking more. And, you know, that's one of the reasons why teens are so talkative with each other. You know, they share, oh, I was thinking I had this, or, you know, they're motor mouths, you know, and they're sort of validating who they are and sharing with other people, you know, what other people are thinking. And I think our teens have lost that, you know, that because they have not been socializing as much, usually they're kind of stuck in their own thoughts. And a lot of what we think is not healthy, all of us. I mean, you know, we all have critical thinking and jumping to conclusions and, you know, kind of can be down on ourselves. In some way, not being self-reflective is protective, you know, because the more aware you are of your thoughts, the more down you can become. So, you know, they may need more help with that and understanding that whatever is going on in their heads is pretty normal everybody has those kinds of thoughts. And the way we get out of it is by sharing it and knowing that, well, I think this, but other people think that. And, so it must be pretty normal. But the kids that have gone through this pandemic, I think, have missed out on some normal socializing, which would help them with that whole process. And the other thing that they've missed out on is all the distraction, like going to school and being around your friends and all that activity that goes on in middle school and high school. They didn't have that. They were kind of stuck in their silos, on social media and on the internet. So it's made all that process even worse. Understanding it may help the adults a little bit, and then may help them be with their kids. I think kids need to get out into the world again, safely. I know I'm still wearing a mask. They probably won't, but they need to do it as safely as possible. And presumably some of that languishing will change into activity, more action. The other thing I would suggest is to do things with them, to get out there and do activities with them. I know in the past they might have wanted to be with their friends more, but they may need to regress a little bit and do more things with parents. If you want them to get involved in activities, go with them, do with them, and, kind of be the positive cheerleader and coach and person alongside of them, giving them some support. It's, although teens sometimes act very know-it-all, like they have all the confidence in the world, underneath that is a lot of insecurity. They're really not sure about who they are yet. They're just developing their sense of self. So I always try to be real careful when working with adolescents. They're very sensitive to any messages that come from the outside. But having somebody alongside who cares about them and is positive with them can be a real help.
Thank you. I distinctly remember actually having a similar conversation with the youth on our youth advisory council. Yeah. And what they shared with me was that sometimes they have to just feel their feelings. And, we have this need sometimes of the caring adult to jump in and fix things for them. Sometimes, part of the positive is letting them get through it and then shifting to a positive, right? So not in that moment when they're upset, let them be upset, let them have their feelings about, missing out on a lot of stuff. But then, what are these positive activities we can do together in a separate capacity, right? So if somebody, missed out on school dances and they're upset about that, right? Well, not necessarily saying, well, we can have our own kind of dance. How about we just have a different positive experience as a caring adult to have those positive experiences and have those ways of connecting with those youth.
Emma, I see there's a question in the Q&A, and I wonder just before we are about to close off, just to respond to it, about a young person who was disappointed when they fell skiing and made a comment that they want to die. And how do we deal with this as just a 5-year-old? I think, certainly as young children, we can be quite expressive with our language, but this certainly was an area of disappointment. And how do we reflect on this and engage with the young person, and encouraging that conversation about what this falling on the skis meant to him, and subsequent to now, where have been some places that he's shown that he can do something perhaps in a separate way. We have one of our toolbox activities is about the voice in our head, and that voice can say, oh, you're no good, you're a failure. But there's also that voice in the head that says, you're great. And so we talk about it as the buddy voice and the bully voice. And maybe this could be an opportunity in a situation like this, where he was feeling very discouraged of falling. What was that bully voice saying? But what might the buddy voice say? What might your good friend say to you? Gosh, you had the courage to try that. I can't get up on the skis at 5 years of age. And so hearing that there's different aspects, and this sometimes can be done with other children or adults. And one is that voice in his head that I blew it and they couldn't do this and I want to die. But then the bully and the buddy could be two other individuals that are speaking up about it. And this can come about in different activities as well. But have seen where young people can be, it's either the black or the white. Like there's not any gray in between. It's I just wanted to die because I couldn't do the skiing. So encourage you to go to our website and see the voice in your head, and that, just modeling it and talking about it can make a difference, because it's that expression, being able to realize I had that courage, I got through it. It maybe didn't work the first time, but what did I learn from it? And what might I do next summer when I try again? Oh yeah, I realized the boat was going a bit too fast, or hey, I'll be a bit taller. So encouraging that kind of conversation.
So when I haven't seen the question, but just listening to you, when I first heard it, I thought, did he want to die because he was in so much pain? Like, was it physical pain or psychological pain? The psychological, I think, is perhaps the shame of being seen by other people as not, as falling off and not looking good to others. But we also have to determine what's the root of it. Is it psychological, is it emotional, or is it physical?
I made an assumption there. Assumption that it was the emotional. That's the way it was expressed.
Wonderful. Thank you both. I see that we have a minute to close out. So I just want to thank you both for your time and your expertise. And it's always great listening to the two of you go back and forth. I always love it. And thank you everybody who shared your questions in the chat. So greatly appreciated, and hope you learned a lot. I know I did. I always learn more when I'm with these two. So again, thanks so much. I do want to share with you all that, in case you haven't heard, we have our 18th annual Breakfast for Champions coming up. So that's going to be a fun event. We are having it both virtually and in person. So if you're interested in tickets, the link to order will be in the follow-up email as well. And just one last note before I let you all go, I'm going to put a survey in the chat. This just always helps us to understand how we can continue to improve, what you liked to hear, how we can continue to offer the best and most informative webinars and workshops and fireside chats to our community. So thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Sure.
Thanks for
thanks.